about to go on.
Recording in progress.
Hello and welcome to Dateline New Haven on WNHH-FM. I'm your host, Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make our community tick. Well, in this last election cycle, and in the new municipal terms beginning now, the Democratic Socialists of America, DSA, have been making some communities tick. They elected 4 local candidates in New Haven in a year when they made gains nationally. And of course, the election everybody was watching was in New York City, when Mayor Mamdani won as Democratic Socialist. And we have 2 of the people won nearby elections for their second terms in office as council members. Abdul Osmanu, a regular here on the show from Hamden's council, and Nate Simpson, who's been filling me in on New Britain, where he just got elected to a second term on the councils. Welcome, gentlemen. So what's the day? Is DSA storming the barricades? What's it looking like?
Interesting. I think that what I would say is there's a message, an organized base of folks that really see a moment needing to be met politically, whether that's nationally, speaking to certain state issues, and I think in our case locally, and it's a message that's resonating with a lot of folks, in this day and age. So yeah, continuing to push and chart the course, but I don't know if we're like knocking barricades down in our neck of the woods yet.
Well, Democratic Socialism had a history of working within the Democratic Party through a group called DSOC, Democratic Socialist Organizing Committee, in the 80s. They merged with something called NAM, National New American Movement or something, became DSA. And we didn't hear a lot from them until Bernie Sanders, at least the mainstream didn't hear a lot about them until Bernie Sanders ran for president in 2016, electrified people with a message of challenging corporate power and the way Democrats done business, speaking more economic populist message. And people around the country started running. And then we had Mamdani's election. And the one people overlooked was also Jersey City was a big one where the candidate who was not a DSA member, but pretty left, won with 2 members of the Democratic DSA on their board last week on a runoff election. But you guys aren't new to this. You've won before. I think when you won your first term, Abdul, weren't there 3 DSA members on the Hamden Council?
So it was 2 DSA members on the Hamden Council, and 1 DSA member on Board of Ed. So it was, Justin Farmer, as well as Miriam Khan, who, was on Board of Ed.
And so now it's you, and there is a second Hamden person, right?
Yeah, Maureen Crouch. Because in between that first term, Lori Sweet really kind of joined the small little cadre group, I guess we would call it, of DSA electeds. So we kind of
became a state rep.
Yeah, so
before she became a DSA state rep now from Hamden as well.
Yeah.
So what does that mean? Hamden in recent years, it was always a little more conservative suburb of New Haven. Yeah. Then all of a sudden it had a higher vote for Democrats in the president's election, like Hillary Clinton got then in New Haven. What's happened in Hamden? Why? How specifically is the Democratic Socialist message resonating in parts of the city?
I mean, I think one of the things we've been able to really do is tailor that message to some of the immediate issues that exist in Hamden, where one of the more funny and ironic things is, one of the things we've talked about as socialists in Hamden is fiscal transparency, and really being astute and honest in how we talk about some of the struggles that we have as a municipality, where that's led us.
And how that's so specifically, I know you guys rejected a budget. Was it because they weren't being honest about the debt or about taxes going up? What were the issues?
Yeah, I think the one funny thing about the budget is I think both of the budgets that were produced, whether it was, the mayor's budget or the budget that the council came up with, were both budgets that I'd say were, had certain key core issues that made them problematic. It was more or less just the council budget that we arrived on was something that I think would put us in a maybe slightly better long-term
What were
position.
the problematic issues? I know there were charges of dishonest accounting.
Yeah, I think really when we're looking at some of the revenue projections that folks decided to put into the budget, whether it was assuming that we were going to get $5 million or $2.5 million from red light and speeding cameras, and that was something that we can put into the general fund budget, which by state statute you actually cannot do that. Now we're going on year 3 of me trying to explain to folks that. or it was certain cuts that were assumed to be made due to spending freezes in the middle of the fiscal year, which still yet to be determined whether those cuts were actually, those freezes were actually done, because we haven't received an audit from like 2000. I think the last audit we had was 2022 to 2023. So kind of budgeting.
So what's the socialist perspective, or maybe there's just good government perspective? What's brought to that? I think look at these issues.
I think transparency about where we are, where I think there's been folks that have alleged of certain improprieties, and people doing things that were maybe corrupt. Whereas I think it's just an example of folks failing to actually clearly communicate where things are. Where I think people that live in this town, whether they're renters or homeowners, actually deserve to have like the ability to transparently know where their money is going to.
And at least half a hand has become more urban over the years. And you define
absolutely.
that as density in terms of income, in terms of racial diversity.
Yeah.
Aren't there core issues about how you're going to raise revenue in a city right now when you have less commercial development than you could have? Aren't there some core that's not about corruption or not, although it is about fiscal honesty? Are there some fundamental fiscal challenges that people aren't facing?
I think
where they're gonna have to tax people more, you're gonna have to allow more kinds of building that isn't just zoned for one use but not another.
Exactly. That's one of the big things that I've really been pushing, is that when you look at Hamden as a municipality, we're in a place that is fiscally unsustainable, where 80% of the revenue that we make is from like residential taxpayers. And when you look at some of the density, like my part of town is like relatively dense, but if you look at the town as a whole, we have close to around, I think, 1,500 people per square mile, which when you look at that in terms of municipalities that have like over 40,000 people, I think the only municipality that is in a ballpark of having that dismal level of person per square mileage is Greenwich. And we don't really have the tax.
And why is that? Because Northern Hamden is more, not rural, but it's more.
Yeah, I think it's, if you go like north of Southern Hamden, which I think there's still opportunities that we maybe have in Southern Hamden of adding a little bit of density. The density actually starts to peter off. And we're in a place where we truly do not actually have like the tax base we need to continue to. Like,
so are you a YIMBY guy?
I refuse to, find myself between the YIMBY and NIMBY binary. I think there are like things that each side of the discourse, really fail to think about. Where I was actually just having a conversation with someone who, originally is from Florida, and was talking about some of the perils of, incessant development, where they forgot about, certain infrastructural concerns. And now,
in other words, we had rules put in place for good goals. You wanted the protection of the environment. You wanted people not to come in and make money and destroy a neighborhood. And then the argument is that some of the stuff got outdated. It became hard to build anything. As a result, there's no affordable housing. Yeah. And then there's like leap of faith among the YIMBY people that the more you build, supply and demand will cause rents and housing prices to go down, which may or may not be true. Yeah. And so it sounds like you're sort of taking a little bit from both. Yeah,
so I think that like there are elements of like NIMBYism that like I believe are truly rooted in like the quintessential fear of, low income, housing or whatsoever, but which is weird because when you look at some of these plans and developments, and you're looking at like how the AMI breaks down, where it's just like, oh, okay, cool. You're afraid of someone that
median income.
Yeah, area median income. You're afraid of someone that makes $70,000 a year having the opportunity to live in your neighborhood. Where, for example, I'd say like that's me in this current situation. Which even within that self, like that fear kind of comes from a very, I think, problematic place.
Mm-hmm. And then there's use zone, like people talk about, can you on Dixwell Avenue allow housing there? Can you allow commercial development in other parts? Yeah, which is like one of the funny, ironic things, because if you go down Dixwell Avenue, it's something that I think is supposed to be our main corridor. But it doesn't really have like the look or feel of a main corridor, where you have, 3-unit, housing over there. Not really much like mixed use development that you have over there, which is one of the weird things that like I'm actually like pushing for, that I would say oftentimes finds itself being like a YIMBY reform. Which is mixed use zoning.
Mixed use zoning.
Well, that's when you go back to the urban renewal era and the zoning era when liberal planners were dividing cities up by uses.
Yep.
There was that kind of end of the point where left and right meet, where people felt like planners were planning for people and for the interests of developers, and that for different reasons, left and right wanted to have more flexibility and less zoning. Yeah,
so I think that like I kind of find myself falling in a place where I every place has like its different like circumstances and situations where I think we're in a point where in order for our town to continue moving on and not be in perpetual fiscal crises, we actually do have to build out that tax
So
base.
fair to say you're not build. You say let's look anew at how we can build.
Yes, and like have like actual real goals and plans, and benchmarks that we should meet over that plan of time. And once as we're getting close to meeting that, really be able to assess the needs for the town.
We're talking about Democratic Socialist America, which have elected, I think it is four Connecticut local legislators in the most recent election in a year where they made headlines nationally for wins in places like New York and Jersey City. Nate Simpson is with us from New Britain. So you just won your second term on the New Britain. Is it called the City Council?
So actually, in New Britain's case, we have
If you get close to the mic, yeah.
Oh, I think in New Britain's case, we have the maybe not unique but unusual circumstance where we have instead of a city council, we have a common council. So way back in the day, we mimicked.
What's the difference?
So back in the day, we used to mimic the federal structures legislature, whereas an alder person, the office I serve today, would act as the senator for your district, and further, the district would be made up of individual polling places, which you would elect your city council members from.
Oh. So what is it now?
So it's still the common council because it's when the alder people meet, the city council met along with the mayor. Nowadays, we have the same legal mechanism. It's just the city council isn't actually an elected office, but it's what everybody understands.
So who makes the laws?
The laws are made by the Common Council, which is comprised of the alder people being the legislative and the mayor being the executive.
So you're basically an alder.
I'm an alderman, yeah.
Like we have and they call them aldermen still.
Yes.
Even the women?
Well, no, I go by alder person. I identify as a man.
New Haven, they changed it as alder. But in any case, so that's your second term. We were talking before we went on the air. Your situation is a little different from Hamden, which is that even though New Britain is a city, and what's the population?
About 74,000.
So it's a little bigger than Hamden, but it's really known as one of the cities in New Haven industrial past, a very diverse population like Hamden. You've had 12 years of Republican mayor, Aaron Stewart, who is now retired, is running for governor, and you've just elected your first Democratic mayor in 12 years, correct?
Yes, and prior to that, there was one term of a Democrat, and then it was maybe 4 or 5 terms of a Republican before him.
But there are more Democrats than Republicans in the city, right?
It's around 3-1, yeah.
Democrat.
Yep.
And is it also, did the alder makeup change on the council, or was it before all Democrats, or is it all Democrats now?
Compared to the last term? Yes, it was 8 Democrats, 7 Republicans, with me being the only working families Democrat. Now there are 10 Democrats, 5 Republicans, and there are now 2 working families Democrats.
Who are both, but you're the only DSA.
Correct.
And so, I'm sorry, it went to 10 to 5 from 8 to 7. So what happened? How did New Britain become more democratic?
Other way around, went from 8-7 to 10-5.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily that we became more democratic overnight. It's that candidates like Aaron Stewart have what I describe as like a home field advantage, right? So you grow up in the school system, you grow up in the city streets, drinking the city water. You develop these interpersonal relationships that will support your political efforts down the line.
Nate, would you mind moving the mic a little just so you could be head on it? Maybe face me. Yeah.
How's this?
That's good.
Gotcha. So, yeah, I think candidates like Aaron Stewart have the avenue to develop those local relationships that will support a mayorship or a candidacy, regardless of whether their politics actually agree or not. Mm-hmm. And I would find on the doors a lot of the time when I would ask people, they would go, I like Aaron Stewart. She's done a lot for the city.
And why did the Democrats have candidates that people liked?
They had candidates that they liked, but I think that's something that the Democratic Party in particular, and I'm saying this because I take part ownership of it, is that our messaging doesn't connect with people's day-to-day issues too often.
Are you talking now about New Britain, Connecticut, nationally?
Mostly nationally, right? I think the Republicans take a position that the federal politics and the local politics are separate. I tend to disagree with that, and one of the things that highlights that is the consistent errors in messaging that I see coming from the national level of our politics, and that does bleed down to the local.
So what would be an example of that messaging that you think was off base, and how did you message differently when you ran for office?
some people, when they run for office, they use trigger words, right? Things like defund the police. I tend to take a step back and say, look, no, we care about public safety, right? Because the framing about public safety should be closer to how do we let people engaging in good faith go about their business, right? And in that, you come up with your policies, your laws, and your regulations that a new administration may or may not enforce. And one of those policies, I think, was maybe providing a new high school at no cost to taxpayers. This was a promise that a lot of Democrats put forward in New Britain.
How do you do that?
Sphere. Exactly. That's why I don't put it forward. To me, that says possibly instituting charter schools, leaning into private education, which
so Democrats run for us. New Britain said, let's build a new high school and not pay for it?
Not pay for it. It's just the logistics aren't there for it, in my opinion, and so I'm hesitant to promise that, right? And it's,
so are
it's
you
this
with Abdul here on fiscal responsibility being an issue that Democratic Socialists should embrace, or transparency?
Fiscal responsibility Fiscal responsibility is a set of values you need to implement to actually get things done, right? And that doesn't come with a capitalist label or a socialist label or a Republican or a Democratic label. We don't get to change the fact that dominoes fall, but we can change the direction in which they do.
So it'd be an example on the ground, not promise a high school you can't afford to build.
Right. That can be a start. In last year's city budget, I prioritized public education by finding millions of dollars year over year over year that would go into public schools. I found money that would fully fund the library. And
where'd it come from?
It's still coming from city revenues.
But I mean, what did it come out of?
It didn't come out of anything. It came out of, I guess in a way, it came out of the organic growth of our grand list. And the difference there were the priorities. The Republican budget said no increases to public services, but we're going to cut your taxes.
Oh, I see.
The trick is they don't tell us.
That's a nice position to have a town where, unlike Hamden, you have more revenue coming in. Is there a building boom in New Britain? Or? Like, why is there more revenue coming in that you could tap rather than have to decide what to cut?
I would peg that towards the inflation of like real estate values. The organic growth of our grand list is signaled by not our tax rate, our mill rate going up, but the value in properties. How much did
the grand list go up?
It was single digit percentages, but that does translate into budget priorities that cause $1.5 million in one bucket to be available, whereas without that 1.5% of growth, we wouldn't be able to decide where.
Whereas in Hamden, is it growing at all? Or
oh
is it
yeah, no, we actually
did.
We did have experienced a growth in our grand list.
But the debt, they have a bigger debt load than New Britain.
Yeah. We have a much larger
is that pension?
Pension, our long-term pension and unfunded pension liabilities. That more or less, have put us in a place where, despite our grand list growth, it doesn't really catch up with some of the long-term liabilities that we have to keep up with. And the increased grand list really was just a facet of property values increasing more so than actual added building and development.
We're talking to Abdul Osmanu and Nate Simpson, two Democratic Socialists of America DSA members who have just been reelected to their legislative councils in Hamden and New Britain. So tell me an issue you ran on that you're now going to take action on that symbolizes the Democratic Socialist approach you bring to government.
Yeah, one of them is the threat to SNAP cuts, right? We saw...
Which is food stamps.
Food stamps, right. Keeping food on the table. Very socialist kind of idea, especially when the government is providing said service. We saw Donald Trump cut SNAP benefits. We pressured the governor, and by we, I mean just the activist community, organizers across the state, pressured the governor. He released $500 million to cover those cuts. And something I ran on was protecting public services. In New Britain, we have 2-year terms, but we have, assuming all reasonable outcomes, we have 3 more years of this president, right? So one of the things that I ran on was protecting public services, and I don't remember if the cuts came before or after Election Day, but we didn't spend any time. We said, Governor, we need this money. We need it yesterday. So we got a $500 million stowed away. That's going to fund, to my understanding, not only the SNAP cuts, but any other cuts coming our way.
Right.
Now, SNAP being $72 million a month, according to a report I read, tells us we've got maybe 4 to 6 months of actual funding, right? So part of my organizing is to help keep our food pantry stocked if and when that money expires or gets spent.
And how about you, Abdul? What was an issue you ran on that you're going to be tackling?
I think one of the issues that I ran on that I was able to put a really interesting democratic socialist tilt to was more or less connecting some of like the fiscal issues that we have in our town to the desire in the spirit of like transparency, democratizing some of our finances as much as possible. And what I mean by that is one of the things I was able to get done in this past term on council was the usage of $169,000 worth of money that was put in a restricted account in the aftermath of like ARPA that we were able to use towards participatory budgeting in Hampden Public Schools, where now I see that's something that New Haven Federation of Teachers has actually taken interest to.
That's when you said a certain amount of money where the public gets to vote on how it's used.
Yeah,
so I know they did that in neighborhoods for a while in New Haven. Here's $10,000, pick a project you're going to do.
Yeah. So we were more or less able to do that with all of our public schools in Hampden. And one of the thoughts that I have is really as we chart ourselves, hopefully outside of some of the fiscal issues that we have. We can really begin to instill in our town like a sense of you are someone that lives in this town, whether you are a renter or homeowner, and you deserve like an actual meaningful seat at the table and power and dominion over some of the issues that are decided on. Where even taking a step beyond that, one of the things that I really campaigned on was taking some of the red light and speeding camera money that we are going to be getting and diverting that towards a special fund. Since I was saying you can't actually put that in your general fund. And giving the opportunity for neighborhood participatory budgeting as it relates to traffic calming. So, giving people in neighborhoods.
That means if you live like right by the border of New Haven and there's that whole intersection there by the Hampden Hall, letting neighbors decide if they want to have speed bumps or rerouted streets or things like that.
Yeah. And I think that would be a process that would be, of course, liaised by like our engineering department, as well as, town planners and so on and so forth. But I think that, in a time where we are fiscally is uncertain, especially until we get, our missing audits, I think it's a really important thing to really instill in our town that like one of the ways we fell into this trap was the, delegation of a lot of, financial and fiscal issues to folks that didn't really exactly have the public's best interest in mind. And the way that we actually structurally remedy that, and I think is something held core to my values as a democratic socialist, is that you empower people. When government fails or lacks in being able to commit and follow up on its duties in terms of advocating for working class people, you hand working class people power, because that is what accountability and well-functioning government looks like to me.
So housing is another big issue in our communities, and DSA has been at the forefront of that, at least in New Haven and in Hampden, where the organization has organized, or members of the organization have organized tenant unions. That's been the big story in New Haven. We had many years of slumlord stories, big slumlord stories, and DSA has at least a half dozen, right? Tenant unions in New Haven, one in Hampden, and or a couple. And then you also got state law changed, so there's more power for the fair rent commissions, right, than there used to be.
Yeah, as well as the population requirements have dropped, where if you're over 15,000 people, you get a fair rent commission.
How did that factor into your campaign, and where the housing issues stand in Hampden in addition to affordability?
Yeah, so kind of as I said, we're in a weird place where we actually have to add more, property and like taxable property to our tax rolls in order to actually survive as a town. And I think this is where a little bit of like my democratic socialist values come in, where I know, just the idea of building everything and hoping that the market solves it is something that seldom actually does work out. So we have to be really creative in how we look at that, where, in my first term, in my first 2 terms, we have, expanded like the rights of tenant unions as far as we possibly can at the local level. We have upped some of like our blight fines, which a quick shout out to Liam Brennan, the director of
who
LCI.
You worked for when you were
Yes, who I worked for.
Then he got hired to do the things he said you guys were going to do with housing.
And that's been absolutely beautiful and amazing to see a lot of the stuff that, we cooked up on the campaign and working on really being able to
I give credit to the
effect.
guy he ran against for hiring him to do it.
Oh, yeah, no. I give Mayor Elliker as well credit. Love him or hate him, I think Liam Brennan is one of the most like talented people that I know when it comes to really being able to come up with creative solutions in the realm of housing. But one of the thoughts that I really have been workshopping a lot in Hampton and campaigned on was the idea that, like, cool, we are actually going to have to deal with developers in order to actually build, affordable housing, but then also, fit certain needs for like market and luxury housing where needed or possible. And I say that with like the hand gestures because it's tough. It's a tough thing for me to admit or say as a socialist.
Well, the question is whether you believe that is going to create more opportunity for working class people, either through more revenues to the city if you don't give them too many tax breaks and if you assess the property properly, which we don't do in New Haven, or whether it means you believe that that will relieve pressure on the housing supply at the lower rents and not have them go up as high.
I believe most primely that it's going to help like our total grand list and the amount of like taxable property that we're going to get. As it pertains to affordability, I'm a little bit skeptical, which is why one of the broad ideas that I was talking about during the campaign was, taking advantage of some of the, new revenues we're going to get from some of the blight fines, as well as the idea from a fellow counselor of creating like a housing trust fund, and pairing that with our registry and inspection sort of, housing department that we're like working on piloting and getting up and running in like the coming fiscal years.
Just so I can follow all the steps you just made.
Yeah.
So you have higher fines now for blight?
Yes.
Did they exist before, or is it just that you made them bigger?
They didn't really exist. I mean, they existed, but they were
So
rather
you have
low.
new blight funds that you're going to have.
Yeah.
And you want to use them to do what?
We want to pair them with like our housing trust fund that we have.
What does that do?
So instead of actually like selling properties that we have and like come up with, through someone not paying, their tax bill or whatsoever.
So property foreclose on.
Yes, property we foreclose on, actually holding on to that property and seeing what like opportunities exist in terms of being able to, maybe ground lease that property and sell it back to a developer rather than, immediately thinking, how do we sell this off to the highest bidder? Making sure that like the way in which we're treating that property gives us,
save it for affordable.
Yes,
housing.
we save it for like affordable housing, and where we can make like a decent profit off of, working with, an affordable housing developer pursuing that. So the idea is, using that alongside like our landlord registry that we're trying to come up with, where of course there would be fees for that. So we would accumulate and amass some money for that. And
so you want to create a landlord registry like in New Haven?
Yes. Also want to
find
create
a way to actually make sure they register.
Yep.
And then when you talked about, were you also talking about putting funds back into housing inspection, or?
Yes. Putting funds back into housing inspection, but using some of like the revenues that I would anticipate we're going to make to be bold enough to ask the state for, community investment fund or other grants to be able to start our own community land trust in partnership with possibly a nonprofit, and maybe emulate some of the work that I've seen the Naugatuck Valley project do in Waterbury with the Brookside co-ops that they've been able to build.
Co-ops are interesting. We had a whole history of that in New Haven in the model city urban renewal era in the 670s. We formed all these nonprofit hosted co-ops that worked really well. And then a lot of them failed because of fights on the board. There was one on Edgewood Avenue that after like 20 or 30 years, there were one mortgage payment left, and they all fought and dissolved, and the developer got it. Co-ops are tough.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
they're a good model.
Co-ops are tough, but they're a good model. I think, like I was saying, Brookside Co-op in Waterbury, is an interesting example of, how you can have a heterogeneous, population that is able to, really coexist and thrive within like a co-op and organize, alongside one another. So yeah, I think that really is one of the thoughts of what we can do to be able to more assertively, command ourselves in the housing market.
And it's this thing when you win
like
about
private
like making room for luxury developers, like Bernie Sanders did in Burlington. We did waterfront development, but he negotiated
exactly
deals that also benefited people. Although
Yep.
that didn't
So you're
include some
talking
of the socialists.
Yep, exactly.
And Mamdani, when he ran, he waited till the end, but
Yep.
he embraced the ballot initiatives that were promoted by the bill people, even though he wasn't blindly YIMBY,
Yes.
to make some of the regulations relaxed so you
Yeah.
can build denser housing.
Yeah, so I'd say that's more or less where like I am, where like I've actually paid like great attention to some of the work that Bernie Sanders did as mayor of Burlington, Vermont.
He
In
got
fact-
trashed for some of that, but I thought he
yeah.
struck a good deal.
Yes,
developer.
it's an amazingly good deal where if you go there now, the Champlain Valley Housing Trust actually owns like quite a bit of housing in like that area. And it's really like provided a lot of stability to the market. So I guess one of the weird things that I'd like to say is that if I were to surmise it, it's the fact that like, cool, I recognize that I am a socialist, but like I am existing within the constraints of like a capitalist system. So how in our unique situation do I allow ourselves to be able to develop and gain the revenue that we need to actually keep our town fiscally afloat and solvent, while also taking care of and using whatever funds and proceeds that we can to be able to, on our own accord, build a little bit more affordable housing. And the hypothetical thoughts of what that actually does to our market, our housing market, and possible positions it gives us the opportunity to take when we're dealing with developers. So working as an actual public sector within like the framework of like housing in a nonprofit way.
We're talking to Abdul Osmanu and Nate Simpson, who have been reelected as Democratic Socialist of America DSA members, who are Democrats on the local legislative bodies of Hamden and New Britain. So, Nate, how did housing come up in New Britain, and what's something you've been working on with housing?
So I have the distinct pleasure of chairing our Planning, Zoning, and Housing Committee in New Britain. One of the things that part of the work—
Does that mean of the legislature? Committee? Is that a committee of legislature, or is it a separate commission?
Of the Common Council, yeah. So it's 9 members. In New Britain, the Common Council the Alder people are the zoning authority.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Well, we are New Haven, but we also have a zoning board and a city plan commission. Certain things get decided by them, and certain things have to come back to the alders for final approval.
Right.
So that's true in your case too, like individual properties versus policy.
No, we're the direct zoning authority. So like a lot of cities have the zoning board and then the zoning board of appeals.
Mm-hmm.
The board of alders, for all intents and purposes, is the zoning authority.
So they come to you and they want a new sign up that's bigger than the rule says.
Yeah, if they apply for a variance, they have to come before my committee. We have to hear about the 3x2 sign that they want to put up and say, is this in our characteristic? Are these in the characteristics?
I hope
of
you
our
always say
neighborhood?
yes.
Yeah,
those rules are stupid.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. There are rules on the books, but personally, the difference between a 5 and a 6 foot fence probably isn't going to address the bigger needs here, right? And when it comes to housing, it's very interesting. I've been reading some laws that are already on the books. I don't think it would be strategic to mention which ones here, but I think municipalities do have the ability to play a greater role to take on housing directly. And that's not to say necessarily regulate the relationship between the landlords and tenants as is. That's to say, how do we get housing established as a public good? Will you let the public sector participate in that market?
That's sort of what Abdul's talking about. So what kind of state laws are you talking about to do what?
There's one in particular that allows us to take on fair housing pretty directly. The language.
And what is fair housing? Does that mean who's denied rental properties? Is it to have properties sold?
It's a very good question. A lot of people, when I say fair housing, they hear affordable housing. Legally, these are entirely
I hear who
different
you rent
things.
to.
Right. So.
Well, which is right?
So fair housing pertains particularly to discriminatory housing practices. But the way the law is worded, municipalities can provide for fair housing. Now, I think that's just general enough language for us to take more material action than say, don't discriminate. And the courts have reaffirmed this in the 70s and the 80s on the federal level.
So what can you do besides don't?
That's the experiment here. So I'm still pouring through these laws, but at the same time...
Well, what would you like to... What kind of goals do you have for that? What kind of actions would you like to see this town take?
So... It's not necessarily what the town would take. It's what I want our residents to have, right? I want our residents to have dignified, fair, and really stable housing, right? People can't develop roots if they're constantly being evicted from one place to another, or they're being
So you're saying,
from
in addition to
cities.
discrimination in who you rent to, you thinking it could be expanded discrimination in how evictions take place?
I'm saying I think municipalities might have the wiggle room to be what's called in the legislature a lot of the times, a housing provider.
Meaning
they can rent out units directly.
If they don't own them, or if they do own them.
There's actually...
we have housing authorities that own property and rent them.
Right.
So what would be the difference here?
So the difference here would be what it could be, right, is if cities were able to set up a rent-to-own system for the entirety of that person's tenancy, they would pay rent to the municipality, generating revenues, and you can use that for whatever because none of that is established, right?
And then they own at the end.
They own it.
Well, what kind of properties are we talking about? City owned, housing authority owned?
These would, I guess in a basic sense, city owned. And through that, with the work of tenant unions, municipalities have a lot of leeway to execute contracts when it comes to leasing and rentals, which means if the city were to own a building outright, they could handle all of the negotiations collectively in one shot, guarantee people fair leases, and give them a vehicle to have the housing I just described.
So I'm trying to figure out, and I'm sorry being a little dense, how's this different from just public housing?
You don't own public housing at the end of it, right? And that's a fundamental difference.
That's really interesting. And that you see as a model through fair housing, they can't just do it on their own right now?
I think that question has yet to be answered.
Very interesting.
And take some brave
sounds like
policies
some creative.
to address it.
So before we let you guys tell us a little bit about yourselves, Nate, did you grow up in New Britain?
Born and raised. Just real quick on the housing model.
Yeah.
During somebody's entire tenancy, the city would still be collecting revenues. So you can use that to do things like fund education, take care of the units, and even use that revenue to offset everybody else's taxes. So you don't have to leave homeowners behind by giving people good housing, right? So yeah, I just want to have that tidbit. And at the end of it, they become taxpayers by owning the unit, right? So there's a big trade-off, and it offers people democratic control over the spaces they live in. But yeah, I'm born and raised in New Britain. Shout out to New Britain General Hospital. I made it down the hill, and I represent the neighborhood it's in now.
How old are you?
26.
And what do you do for a living?
Well, for almost a decade, I spent in Yukon Health's kitchen, where I've been an ardent union member. I've been a union steward. So I occupy my time with fighting for the working class, not only like as part of my job, but as part of my day-to-day life.
So is your job a cafeteria worker?
So I left it about a month and a half, or probably 2-3 months ago at this point. But up until then, I would be the guy to make sure that the food we give patients isn't actually harming them, right? I can't tell you how many people come into a hospital fresh from a heart attack and they go, I want a burger and 12 salt packets. Like, with love, no, we can't do that.
Which hospital is that?
Yukon Health. It's our state's only public academic research hospital.
Where is that?
It's in Farmington.
Okay. And what are you doing now?
Now I'm actually putting a lot of my time into figuring out these fair housing laws, because I'm asking the housing lawyers, and just nobody knows about the case law regarding these laws on the books. So I think in the 70s and 80s, Connecticut took a lot of steps forward in housing, and then we just sat on it for about 50 years. And these policies are so fragmented across state statutes, I don't know if these facts have just been assembled in the same spot to then answer the question of what is a municipality's role in providing fair housing.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Great.
So pretty much till then, I'm going to make it through the holidays, and then we'll see. We'll put socialism to the test.
All right, Abdul, were you school still? Abdul?
No, I think that's been the funny thing. I've been around for like long enough that like everybody, always thinks that I'm still in school. I actually graduated 2 years ago.
Way to go.
Yeah, I'm 24. I ran for council while I was, 19, got sworn in on my 20th birthday, which was like really cool. I think a little quick thing to add on the housing thing. I think we have like the beauty of the 2008 decision between the Property Owners Association of New Haven versus the City of New Haven in terms of like rental registries, where if you kind of read that decision, there was like a wide range of powers that I think are really now granted to or implied to municipalities through the ruling that came through there, where I guess I'm going to be a little less facetious than Nate here. I think we at the local level, it is, far past due time to actually propose the idea of passing just cause eviction ordinances, where we have, time after time, looked at the state to, take that up. But I think our state legislature in many times have, in the past couple of years. Are we allowed to,
or is that you need enabling legislation?
I believe we don't actually need enabling legislation to do that, because it's not anything that like directly, it's something that isn't directly preempted. But then also when you look at like the case law that already currently exists, I believe that since people that are over the age of 62 and people are disabled have the right to actually have just cause eviction protections, there is previous case law that suggests that so far as we're able to keep our good word on making sure that people that are disabled and over 62 have just cause eviction protections, there's actually nothing wrong with expanding that. It would be more or less just coming up with the right legal mechanism to be able to enforce that in a way that doesn't quite intervene in the relationship between like the landlord and tenant and the landlord starting the eviction process, more so as like an intermediator or intermediate of that. So I think the legal framework of how you actually place that in is more or less the question rather than whether you can do that or not. I was going to explain about myself, but you could. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say. So you're saying
Explain yourself.
Well, I hope this gets
teasing.
to that. So you're saying the state law as is grants just cause protections for people over the age of 62 or if they're disabled, right?
Yes.
And that sets sort of like the baseline of state expectations.
Yeah.
And given that municipalities can go beyond state expectations, expanding those to everybody would still meet that criteria.
Yes, where more or less that's kind of like the legal framework that was pursued under New Haven actually expanding their like landlord licensing program. It wasn't something that, was deeply or innately, put into state law. It was really just like an interpretation that said like, cool, the state actually grants us this power.
So you want to set up a registry for landlords like in New Haven, and you want to expand what the town could do with just cause evictions.
Yes, and I think it's something that the organizer in me says that it is not just enough to do that in Hampton. That is something that I want to be able to partner with other, legislative elected officials in the state to push. Because I really do mean it in a time that like, cool, everybody is looking at what happened in New York City and they're like, oh yeah, Zoran Mamdani, we got him elected, great. I had the pleasure of like for a couple of months, like I was subcontracted as a political consultant and did a little bit of work on the campaign.
It must have been fun.
Very fun.
That was like the best campaign to watch in this century.
Yeah, it was fun too because like I remember telling people in December or January, I was like, he's going to win, and they're like, what? I probably if I wasn't Muslim, I would have betted money on it. But more or less, I think we're in a moment where people are actually demanding more from like their elected officials and politicians, and they're asking themselves like, cool, we need people that are going to be able to work on things and like, meet the moment. This is how we meet the moment. And I want to really put the onus on the state government to act, because the only reason why we're doing this is because we've tried Just Cause for like 3 to 4 years and it has yet to pass.
All right. And what are you doing these days for a living?
I actually work for the Connecticut Education Association as a government relations staffer. So, having the opportunity to, play myself out in the movement, whether it's as an elected official or, helping teachers across the state.
Well, it's always a treat when you come in here and bring your great energy to WNHA. So thanks for making time.
And you bring the Bengal spice tea.
That's right. Always there for you. And Nate Simpson, was such a treat to meet you and find out more about New Britain.
Of course. Thanks
Good luck to both of you. And thanks for joining us. Thanks to Harry Droz behind the controls. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience performing I Wish I Knew How It'd Feel to Be Free from the group CD A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free with us all day and all night long at WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio.